Hey, podcast listening people, welcome to another very, of course, exciting, interesting, and educational episode of B2B Mentors. And I'm coming at you with a guest today. We're bringing in top CMOs, marketing experts, business development leaders, business celebrities, if you want to call them that. And we're doing it all for free. So make sure you do us this tiny favor in exchange. Make sure you share the show, tell folks about it, leave a review. If you haven't done that yet, would be amazing. I get all your DMs and messages. I see you guys listening. And so if in return you get a little tiny golden nugget, which I know you will, especially with today's guest, make sure you do us that tiny favor. And with that as well, I am bringing in my friend, Wendy Lurrie, up on the stage. We're going to nerd out about marketing. She is most recently the CMO at Sinequa, high-level marketing leader at organizations like Medidata Solutions and well-recognized marketing agencies. She's an expert across the full spectrum of marketing disciplines with broad and deep experience in brand, direct CRM, digital marketing, and integrated marketing, and a lot more. Because I told you, like, brag. You're like, I don't want to brag about it, Connor. I want to be humble. And I'm like, no, that's not the point. We're going to just highlight the rock star that you are. So welcome, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you, Connor. It's good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, you want to give us a little highlight? Where are you at right now?
Well, where I am right now, I'm in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, which is the upper right-hand corner of the state. We're actually 4 miles from the Canadian border. We could walk across the border. So pretty remote.
Yeah,
but the
definitely.
tech works. The tech works.
And are you liking the remote life? Are you liking the country life? I don't know if you've lived that before, but you're more kind of in the city and back and forth between there, right?
Yeah, I don't love the suburbs. That's sort of the part I like the least. I like the country and I like the city. And I'm a New Yorker, born and bred. I've lived in New York City all my life, so it's really nice to have the contrast of real remoteness, really being cut off, and kind of an absence of population density. I don't know if we have more cows than people, but close.
I can affiliate with that. Growing up in Wellington, Colorado, which is right on the Wyoming border, and your next 10 neighbors are all cows and farmers from like mile across. And I'm now a city boy, so
you get it. You get both sides.
100%.
They both have their advantages.
100%.
Yeah.
So what is it now, what has led you ultimately into this wild world, us crazy marketers, who somehow decided to go down this career path? Where did you find yourself in, most recently as a CMO?
Oh, I'm sorry. What's the question?
What led you to, your career path into marketing and most recently as CMO? Yeah.
Okay, sure. So, I graduated college in the 80s, in the go-go 80s, where all anybody wanted to talk about was how they were going to make their first million. And I was an English major, and nobody was beating a path to my door. And the job I got coming out of college was the continuation of a summer job working in commercial real estate. And I did that for a couple of years. Hardcore selling, canvassing, knocking on doors, the whole thing. And realized about a year or two in, this really wasn't the right fit with my skill set. And I thought, because I had a background in writing, and I've always written, that advertising and publishing seemed to be the sort of best suited field. And I literally flipped the coin, and advertising won. And then I started life in agency land, which is a great place to learn. You get to work on a range of client engagements, all different kinds of categories, all kinds of different challenges. And I started out in client services. Moved from client services to biz dev, which I turned out to be much better at than I was at client services. Biz dev led me to agency management, where I got to lead some really fantastic agencies with a lot of concentration in areas like healthcare, financial services, healthcare, insurance, tech are sort of the categories that I'm very comfortable in. I was recruited away from my agency life at one point to a client I had been pitching, which was interesting. So I went over and walked the client walk for a few months and realized I wasn't really emotionally ready to be a client yet. Came back to the agency, continued my agency career for a long time. And then I took a break and started a marketing and strategy consultancy with a partner We had one client. It was a very large financial services client. Did that for a few years. That was super interesting because we were basically advisors to the CMO. So we got to understand what it was really, what their lives were really like. And, on the agency side, you have an impression of what it's like on the other side. And I think in a lot of ways that gap has grown. I think there's less of an understanding and definitely less empathy on the two sides. So did that for a while, came back out of it because I really wanted to be part of a team again. I mean, consulting was cool, but I'm better with a team. So I joined an agency that was B2B specialized. It was a pure play B2B agency called Gyro, which was fantastic. Started working there, was asked to start the agency's first ever healthcare practice, which I did. It was called Gyro Human. It was really, really fun. And through that work, I got to work with clients like Medidata, who I met through the process of building this practice. We launched their first ever brand campaign, excuse me. Excuse me. And a few years later, I had the opportunity to join Medidata on the marketing team to lead global marketing. And shortly after that, through some reorgs, some changes, some acquisitions, I was given the opportunity to lead global marketing at Medidata, which was fantastic and some of the most valuable time I've ever spent in my business career. And I loved it, and I learned what it takes to sell enterprise software, and I learned a lot more about what it's like inside a corporation. And then most recently, as you mentioned, I was the CMO at Sinequa, which does AI-powered search, really interesting technology. And that's how I got to here.
What was it about Medidata that made it feel like, wow, this was like some of the most powerful learning experience that I had? Or
Well, there
just
were a few
experience
things.
in general?
Sure. Medidata was a really interesting organization because it still had a bit of the soul of a startup, even though it was large and well-established and well-respected. So you could still innovate, and we encouraged our teams to innovate and experiment and fail. And we let everybody know it was okay to fail because it was the only way we were going to learn. And it was very much an environment that promoted that kind of experimentation and risk-taking. It was amazing. And though Medidata is a tech company, it's a tech company for life sciences. So there's a humanity that you deal with when you're dealing in life sciences. We were working on helping our clients run their clinical trials, including running the Moderna trials for the new vaccine. So what we were doing really mattered. It's one thing to have a mission and be mission driven. It's another thing when your entire enterprise is focused on that mission. And that's exactly what Medidata was.
Do you have any good examples of just something totally out of the box you did on the marketing front and you're like, I don't know if this is going to work, and it ended up actually doing pretty well?
Well, a few of those. I mean, one of them was an idea that someone on the team brought about basically putting a system in place to make every employee a brand ambassador. And everyone talks about that. But this team member found a platform basically that would allow us to create curated content that was available to all employees so that they could post on social, which everyone wanted to do, but no one ever knew what to post. And we made it very, very simple. It was completely turnkey, and it really drove our engagement. And it started to snowball. As we piloted it with a handful of executives with the idea that we would leverage their networks to build the brand. We did that, but it also worked in reverse, which was really interesting. And as it started to pick up steam, other parts of the organization asked if they could play. Like, how do we get into this too? So that was just something we tried that we had no idea if it would work. It had a low barrier to entry, and it was great. Absolutely cost-effective branding. So there's one.
Almost every company nowadays needs to leverage and utilize that personal branding. But at the other side, we've got CMOs, marketing leaders. They try to roll it out across the organization and fail versus doing it like, let's find the one person, make it successful, scale it to 2 or 3, roll it out. And this still, even now in 2023, seems to be a major struggle for B2B marketers. And I think it ties in perfectly with our topic too, but go ahead.
But no, you're right. And part of, I think, what makes programs like this work is doing everything as a pilot. I grew up in direct marketing. One of the things we used to say in direct marketing is everything is a test. You've never rolled out. Even if you were running things in 50 states, it was thousands and thousands of tests. And that idea of testing everything and doing things in small, manageable pilots has really stuck with me. And I've seen a lot of success with that, because exactly the way you said it, I mean, you start small, don't overblow it, let it start to attract some attention, pick up some steam on its own, and then people want to be part of it. And related to that, and really it's not the topic that we're scheduled to talk about, but it's very, very relevant, is this whole idea of internal comms. I think until I was inside a client organization, I didn't fully recognize the power of internal comms and internal marketing and internal branding. But that is really kind of the foundation that you can build from. So big fan of internal. Everyone should make sure they're fully scoped and have the headcounts to do proper internal comms and internal marketing.
You mean when you say internal, you mean marketing internally to your team members, employees? Would you include clients as a piece of that as well?
It could be clients as a piece of that. But like what we would do is get people excited about things that we were doing before we launched them to the public, make the internal community sort of part of the inside, bring them into the inside. And so we would share creative work with them before we put it out into the world. We would give people a chance to comment and participate. We did a whole bunch of podcasts with our internal experts, but really leveraging the power of the expertise and the culture that an organization has, in a lot of ways, is still untapped.
Totally agree with that. So your experience in B2B agency land, and then, being on the client side, how do I phrase this? Like, what would be the biggest misconceptions maybe, or mistakes that B2B marketing leaders are making when it comes to like going out and working with agencies?
Well, can we talk about I'd love to talk about our the B2B versus B2C kind of thing, because it all kind of connects. So
yeah, definitely. I agree.
B2B has gotten a lot more respect in the last decade or so. But it was seen for a really long time as kind of like the dusty corner of marketing. That wasn't where the excitement was. That wasn't where the creativity was. That wasn't where you got to do all the big ideas that agencies love to talk about. It sort of was premised on this idea, this Econ 101 idea of rational man, that if you give someone the information they need, they will make the correct decision. And that emotions don't play a role, and fear doesn't play a role, and anxiety doesn't play a role. While we recognize as marketers that in the consumer space, all of those things matter. Passion, emotions, fear, and that everybody gets that who does proper consumer marketing. But that B2B was later to the game. And it took a while for people to rally around the fact that actually B2B decision-making is emotional. And it's emotional because the stakes are high. When you buy a consumer product and it doesn't work, it may piss you off, it may inconvenience you, but it doesn't put anything in your life at risk necessarily. Whereas when you're making a B2B decision, that recommendation that you make inside an organization, if it's not the right recommendation, if you recommend the wrong vendor, your reputation is at stake. Your job is at stake. And with that, your ability to feed your family and pay your mortgage is at stake. So when the stakes are higher, the risks are higher. And we talk about it as emotion, but I think it's actually a more specific thing than emotion. I think it's fear. And I think there's a tremendous amount of anxiety inside organizations about making the wrong decision. And the impact of that has been that one of the ways you deal with not wanting to make a decision is you distribute decision-making responsibility. And so you go from a decision maker to a buying committee. And all of a sudden you introduce many more stakeholders. So you have a much more complex buying process, and it drags out much longer. So it takes much, much longer to make the sale. And those are manifestations of this organizational unease about making the wrong decision. And that's why the stakes are so high. I attended a presentation last week that was given by the International Advertising Association and the World Advertising Research Center, and they were talking about a lot of these ideas. and the role of brand in B2B. And part of the reason the role of brand is so important in B2B is they had a statistic that was just mind blowing, that 90% of buyers choose brands that they thought of at the very beginning of their search. So they're not being convinced, they're coming into these decisions with certain brands in mind. So your brand needs to be top of mind. You need clear messaging, you need ubiquity of media so that you're known by the right prospects, because brand is shorthand for trust.
Mm.
It's a version of the old nobody gets fired for recommending IBM. There was a kernel of truth in that is still true today, and probably even more so. And the other thing that's related is what digital has done for B2B marketing. I mean, it's done it for everything, but one of the things that it's done specifically with B2B marketing, and we have the data to support it, is something between 60 and 70% of all the research a prospect does is done by themselves before they will ever talk to someone in sales. So they're coming in, it's not this tabula rasa of like, tell me about your brand, tell me about your products. People are coming in with ideas, with biases, with intention, and where your brand fits in sort of their universe of thought has a huge impact into whether or not you're going to go into the consideration set.
Tied into about 65% of that buying committee now is millennial Gen Z as well.
Yes, who bring in different values, which I think are wonderful in the marketplace, but complicates buying decisions. And all of these things just make the buying process that more complex, that much longer. I've worked in organizations where the sales cycle is 3 years. The world changes in 3 years. The tech changes in 3 years. But that's how long these buying decisions can take. But I think one of the opportunities in understanding all of this, and this is to agencies, but this is sort of in general, is if you understand what's actually going on inside a client organization and what goes into these decisions and what the risks are, what the stakes are for the decision makers, you can start to understand what they're going through, and then more importantly, you can empathize with what they're going through and give them what they need. So if what people need is more use cases, more case studies, more references to make them more comfortable, those are not annoyances. Those are assets that we provide to help people feel more confident in the decisions they're making. So I think we need to think of marketing to B2B in terms of that empathy and understanding what our prospects are really going through and what they need.
Do you think a big part of that extension of the buying cycle could also be just the fact that there are so many choices out there and so many options for vendors that it is dragging things along of like, okay, maybe I'll get 1 or 2 quotes just to humor my boss, but now I can go out and get 5-10 different quotes and kind of assess from there. So like the advent of technology and digital has like had a lot of benefits, but I wonder if it's even more difficult now than ever to do business than prior generations.
I think it is. I think it is for a lot of reasons. I think the technology is part. I also think part of it is something you said before with more millennials and Gen Z in the workplace, because one of the things I've seen that those demographic cohorts bring is, and I love this about these cohorts, they care about the values of the brands they do business with. So, and they want to know what those values are. It's one thing to say we have a mission statement. Look at all of our values, aren't they awesome? They want to know that you're living the values. They want to know that if you're saying you're about sustainability, they want to see exactly what you're doing, and they're right. And that's forcing more transparency, which I think is great, but it's also complicating decision making. So, I mean, both things can be true, right? And I think that the introduction of more diversity into the buying process, whether it's demographic diversity, business line diversity, is all to the good. All of it makes the buying process even harder for the marketers.
So
it's
then
an exciting time.
It's interesting times for sure. And I almost wonder if it will find itself full circle in some sense. Whereas going back to not necessarily face-to-face, but building more of those relationships like we used to versus just strictly, we put a outbound email, respond, that turns into a sales cycle. but building more of that social proof and that
Yes.
trust than the explosion of marketing. Everyone's doing content nowadays, and most of it's noise for most people, but the differentiator is really putting a heavy focus on social proof and building experiences and true relationships with their clients versus like just marketing.
Oh, totally agree. And I think the advent of digital has made marketing seem easier. You can put more things in more places, but it doesn't make it more resonant. I do think it's about relationships. I had a boss at an agency a million years ago. We were working on a cereal brand. This was in my B2C days. And he used to say that people wanted to have a relationship with their breakfast cereal. Did they really? No, maybe they just wanted to be part of the Grape Nuts Club. I don't know. But there is something to the idea of that connection between a brand and its user that needs to be reciprocal. It can't be one-sided, and it has to grow over time. So I do think that there will continue to be an opportunity, and maybe even more so because the tech keeps getting better. The tech keeps getting faster and cheaper. It's easier and easier to put more and more marketing messages out there, but you need relationships are important. Clarity is really important. One of the things that I've seen in a lot of marketing is, I'll sort of subtitle this with, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can divide your audience into 1,000 personas and market to each one of them individually doesn't mean it's a good idea, because you're diluting your message. And you still need to stand for something at the very top of all of the things that you do. And then things attached to that, but you have to stand for a thing. And if you are standing for 1,000 things because you're saying we're something for every persona, you stand for nothing. So I think the complexity may lead to a desire for more simplicity, more clarity, more human connection. I think the last 3 years have taught us the value of the human connection. That's what people have been really missing through a combination of a pandemic and the tech that made everything possible, but that also separated everyone from everyone else. We have to shrink the distance between brands and customers, between teams. This is what tech brings. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse.
Excuse me. Sure. Just inhaled in the hair right as we start talking. Is so on back onto the topic of like B2B decision making becoming, not that it maybe is even becoming, we're just recognizing now better, especially with data, that it is a much more emotional decision-making process than B2B. What specific recommendations can marketers take from you and your experience to go out and actually apply that? And I know the other day we've talked about, full funnel, multi-touch, but in practice, how do you see that, going into like any B2B organization?
Know your customer. The most important thing is know your audience, and know what they're interested on the rational side. But getting back to the emotional, know what keeps them up at night. Know what they're afraid of. Know what they're worried about. The more deeply we understand who we're talking to, the better the messages we can craft, the more resonant our marketing will be. But it has to start there. Everything else builds off of that basic customer or consumer understanding, depending if you're doing B2B or B2C. And to the earlier point, I mean, everyone is used to deep research on the consumer side. I mean, a lot of us, grew up at the time of the way Procter used to copy test, and the just tremendous amount of work that was done to make sure they understood what consumers wanted before they put messaging out into the world. We don't really do that as much now. We can put things out there and learn on the fly. But it's a newer phenomenon to understand the B2B buyer this way. And not just at a firmographic level, like any B2B always did firmographics, but at the level of that actual decision maker, that human, and what they're about. And it sounds squishy, but it's not.
Well, tack onto that a little more, be more specific. How do I figure that out? How do I really get to the roots of that? Because that's different. It is a very kind of like, floofy thing. Everyone says it, know your customer, know your buyer, but like in practice.
Well, there are different ways. And you can do it. I mean, obviously research is great if you have the time and the budget to do it. A friend of mine who has a consultancy has been experimenting with an AI personality tool that needs nothing more than an email address, and it will sort a list of prospects into 4 categories. I'm doing this from memory, so let me see if I get this right. So the first group, I think we call the influencers. Those are the people inside an organization who want to bring in a new idea, who want to bring in a new vendor, who want to make change happen. Then you have the champion. That's the person who will actually make sure that it does happen. Those are the 2 sort of sunnier sides of this personality tool. The other 2 are, we joked about the names. One was called the neophobe. So basically someone who's just afraid of anything new. And the challenger.
AKA the CFO and
bingo, CFO, maybe COO, but definitely the CFO and the risk and compliance people.
Yeah.
And another group that we call the challengers, and everyone knows who the challenger is, right? That's the person who's going to be in your face in every single interaction, challenging everything you say. So the challenger and the neophobe are more of the ones who are going to try and block progress, and the first 2 are the ones who are going to try and advance progress. But how do you know who's who? And how do you know what your organization is made of? So we actually ran a few large files through this tool, and we found that we were marketing to pharma companies, and pharma companies are sort of definitionally conservative. 70% of the list was in the second 2 groups. 70% of the lists were challengers and neophobes. And what that told us was, once we got past the sort of big idea that got people interested in the beginning, we needed to give them the tools they needed to help get over those humps. So that's where things like case studies and customer references and those very practical, sort of almost tactile assets that you can hand to someone to help them sell through their organization, those really, really become important when you understand that most of the people in the buying group want to say no. They're not coming in to say yes. But if you know who they are, and if you know what motivates them, what drives them, you can craft the right messaging and create the right assets. So that's how I would put it into practice.
Anything else that you have had as a very long-standing thought or aspect as it relates to B2B marketing that you've maybe changed your mind on recently?
It goes back to something we were talking about before, which is sort of the explosion of media channels and the ease of accessing all those media channels. I don't know that it always works to the benefit of brands. There are a lot of issues with brand safety. But when programmatic media first came along, I thought it was awesome. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, right? I mean, it was the most cost efficient. You didn't have to figure out where your customer was. You just had to follow them. But then all of a sudden with programmatic, they started seeing the ads showing up in places where the brand was not comfortable. And brand safety became a huge issue. And so then we needed to put in guardrails for programmatic. So I definitely changed my mind on that as the technology developed and we started to see what it could really do.
Interesting. That's pretty good insight, and all around, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I'm sure there's probably another 2 hours we could dive into on stuff. So we'll have to see about having you back again sometime.
I'd love to.
And is there anything immediate just for the listeners that, resources, connections, relationships, anything on your end that you're looking for is top of mind for you that we can keep in mind for you as well?
Relationships, resources, and opportunities.
Done.
All
there you go, guys.
Sure.
I love
but
it.
I would just encourage everyone to take advantage of resources from the ANA. They have great B2B resources. There are some great agencies doing work in this field. The IAA and work, like I mentioned, Brand Finance is doing great stuff in terms of valuing B2B brands. They've always valued B2C brands, but there are just great resources that are available. I would encourage everyone to take advantage.
And you missed one, obviously, B2B Mentors podcast as well.
Obviously,
would be
B2B
at least
Mentors.
number one on that list. So
that's
it was
number
last,
one.
but
These
not
are,
least.
No, first and most is the B2B Mentors podcast, of course.
Fair enough. I'll take that and I'll quote it, and then we'll slap it everywhere for social proof. Wendy,
Sounds good.
it's been absolute pleasure having you here. I'm super grateful for you sharing your time. And best way for people to find you, follow you, get into contact with you.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. You heard
Find me
it
on
first.
LinkedIn.
We'll put your link in here. Everyone, make sure you go contact her. And Wendy, again, thanks so much. All the rest of you listening, tuning in, thank you very much. Appreciate you all. Much love. Make it great.